Yo. Stop everything right now. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care what playlist you're on, what video is queued up next, what group chat is blowing up your phone right now. Because what I'm about to tell you in the next few minutes is the kind of information that doesn't come around twice. This is the kind of story that people have been whispering about in closed rooms, in private DMs, in conversations that only happen between people who actually know how Chicago really moves. We all know Chief Keef. Sosa. The man who literally invented a genre. The man who put Chicago drill on the map before anybody even knew what drill music was. The man whose cousin, his own blood, Mario Hess, known to the streets as Blood Money, known to Glow Gang as Big Glow, was shot and killed outside his family home in West Englewood back in April 2014. Chief Keef lost his cousin, his enforcer, his right hand. The man who had $50,000 on the table from a major record label and a whole future ahead of him. And for years, the question of who pulled the trigger has lived in the shadows of Chicago street politics. Names got whispered. Rumors circulated. Blogs posted and deleted. People talked and then went quiet real fast. But nobody with real weight ever stepped forward and said it out loud. Because sources close to Sosa's inner circle are saying that Chief Keef has finally confirmed what the streets have been saying since 2014, that the man responsible for Blood Money's death was King Von. And if that alone doesn't shake you to your core, then here's the part that will completely destroy everything you thought you knew about Chicago loyalty. A block, Von's own neighborhood, the block he repped with his entire life, the community that raised him, protected him, and called him their son, is now moving to ban Chief Keef forever. Not distance themselves. Not quietly cut ties. Not unfollow on social media. Ban him. Permanently. From the block that Sosa himself helped put on the map before Von ever picked up a mic. But here's the question that nobody is asking right now. Why would O-Block turn on Sosa after he finally told the truth? Why would they move to ban the man who just confirmed what happened to one of Chicago's most beloved figures? Unless the truth is something O-Block already knew, and spent years, very deliberately, very carefully, trying to keep buried. Because if O-Block knew who killed Blood Money and stayed silent, that changes everything. That reframes every tribute, every RIP post, every candlelight vigil in ways that are almost too painful to look at directly. Stay right here. Do not go anywhere. Because this story goes deeper than any blog, any podcast, any court document has ever gone before. And we are just getting started. Now, before we get into what Chief Keef allegedly confirmed, we need to go back. Way back. Because this story doesn't start in 2020 when King Von passed. This story doesn't start with Quando Rondo or Atlanta or any of that. This story starts in West Englewood, Chicago, on the night of April 9, 2014, when a young man named Mario Hess walked outside his family's home and never walked back in. Mario Hess. Blood Money. Big Glow. Depending on who you ask, he was one of the most feared enforcers on Chicago's South Side. He wasn't just Chief Keef's cousin by blood, he was Keef's shield. His muscle. The guy who moved in silence and handled things that never made it to the internet. In a world where everybody is performing toughness for cameras and clout, Blood Money was the real thing. And the streets knew it. Which is exactly why when he got shot outside his own home at 30 years old, with a $50,000 record deal sitting on the table and an entire future ahead of him, the silence that followed was not the silence of people who didn't know what happened. It was the silence of people who knew exactly what happened and understood that saying so out loud came with consequences. Chief Keef was devastated. Anyone who followed Sosa during that period saw it in real time. The posts, the tributes, the energy in his music shifting into something darker and more personal. He lost his cousin. He lost his right hand. And in the weeks and months that followed, Keef made it known, not always in words, but always in energy, that he had not forgotten. That he would never forget. And that whoever was responsible for what happened to Mario Hess would carry that weight for as long as they lived. Now here is where the story gets complicated. Because in Chicago, when something happens to someone, the finger-pointing doesn't always happen publicly. It happens in layers. First in the streets, then in the music, then eventually, if enough time passes and enough pressure builds, it comes out in words that can't be taken back. And for years, the name that kept coming up in connection with Blood Money's death, whispered, coded, referenced in bars that only certain people understood, was connected to O'Block, to the same circles that would later produce one of Chicago's most celebrated voices, King Von. Now, Von built his entire legacy on storytelling, on taking real events, real people, real consequences, and turning them into music that felt like living inside a moment. Songs like Took Her to the O, Crazy Story, Problems. These weren't fictional narratives. They were dispatches from a life that was genuinely lived on the edge of everything. And fans loved him for that rawness. For that unflinching commitment to telling the truth even when the truth was ugly and dangerous and career-threatening. But the streets have always known that storytelling can be a confession if you listen close enough. And people in Chicago, people who knew both sides of this equation, who understood the geography of the beef and the history between GB and O'Block, had been listening very closely for a very long time. Sources who spoke to our team, people embedded in Chicago's music and street culture who asked to remain completely anonymous, say that the connection between Von and Blood Money's death was not a secret in certain circles. It was discussed, acknowledged, filed away in that category of things that everybody knows but nobody says because the consequences of saying it outweigh any satisfaction that comes from the truth being public. And Chief Keef, for all his bravado, for all his fearlessness as an artist, lived in that same category of silence for years. Because Keef is not stupid. He understood the landscape. He understood that Von, by the time he became King Von, was not just a street figure. He was a cultural institution. He was Lil Durk's brother. He was OTF. He was connected to power structures that extended far beyond Chicago, far beyond the drill scene, into label politics and industry money and a fan base that would collectively lose their minds if anyone came at Von sideways. So Keef stayed quiet. He moved how he moved. He made his music. He stayed in his lane and let the streets remember what the streets already knew. Earlier this year, a conversation happened. Not a public conversation. Not a podcast. Not a sit-down interview with cameras rolling and publicists in the background managing the narrative. A private conversation between Keef and people close to him, where the topic of blood money came up in a way it hadn't come up in years. Maybe it was the anniversary. Maybe it was something that got said in someone else's interview that touched a nerve. Maybe it was just the accumulation of years of silence finally reaching a tipping point. Whatever the reason, Keef talked. And what he said in that conversation was not vague, was not coded, was not the kind of statement that could be interpreted multiple ways depending on who was listening. According to our sources, Keef stated directly that he knew Von was involved in what happened to Blood Money. That this was not speculation. That this was not something he heard on the internet or read in a blog. That this was information he had carried personally, privately, painfully, for the better part of a decade. He said, and I'm paraphrasing based on what was relayed to our team, that he never spoke on it publicly out of respect for certain boundaries that exist even in the most brutal environments. That there are codes, even when those codes feel like they're suffocating you. That staying quiet was never about fear. It was about not wanting to be the person who poured gasoline on a fire that had already taken enough lives. But he also said something else. Something that our sources described as the most emotionally raw thing they had ever heard Keef say about anything. He said that Blood Money deserved better than to be a secret. That Mario Hess, his cousin, his family, his blood, deserved to have his name said in full and his story told without apology. That reducing what happened to him to a rumor, to a whispered implication, to a reference in someone else's diss track, was its own kind of disrespect. And that he was tired of carrying the weight of someone else's truth while the person responsible got to be celebrated, mourned, and immortalized without ever being held accountable for what they did. Now, when word of this conversation began circulating, the reaction was immediate. People close to Von's legacy went on high alert. And O'Block, the neighborhood, the community, the people who knew Von from the very beginning, started having conversations of their own. Conversations about what Keef saying this publicly would mean. About what it would do to Von's legacy. About whether this was something that could be managed, contained, redirected before it became a full-scale narrative war. And then, someone made a decision that nobody saw coming. Someone in O'Block decided that the answer to Chief Keef talking was not to respond with words. Someone in O'Block decided that the answer to Chief Keef talking was not to respond with words. It was to respond with a ban. And that decision is what blew this entire situation completely wide open. Because you have to understand what banning Chief Keef from O'Block actually means. This is not a Twitter beef. This is not two rappers unfollowing each other and posting vague subliminals. This is not industry politics playing out in a press release. This is Chicago. This is the actual block. The actual neighborhood. The actual streets where these people grew up, where they lost people, where they built everything they have from nothing. And when O'Block says someone is banned, that is a declaration that carries weight far beyond what any social media post could ever communicate. Chief Keef is not just any rapper. Sosa is not just some industry figure who happens to be from Chicago. He is Chicago drill. He is the foundation that every single artist who came after him, including King Von, including Lil Durk, including every O'Block affiliate who ever put a song out, built their careers on top of. Before Keef, Chicago was not on the drill map. Before Bang, before I Don't Like, before Sosa put that city on his back at 17 years old and carried it to a global audience, the world was not paying attention to what was happening on the South Side. And now the very community that benefited from that foundation was moving to erase him from it permanently. Fans were shocked. And that is an understatement. When word started spreading that O'Block was discussing a formal ban on Sosa, social media didn't just react, it erupted. Twitter was moving at a speed that felt like breaking news. Instagram comments were thousands deep within hours. TikTok had people going live to break down the situation in real time, pulling up old footage, old interviews, old music videos looking for clues, looking for the moment where this crack in the foundation first appeared. Because to the outside world, to the fans who grew up on both GB and O'Block music, this felt like watching two pillars of the same building suddenly turn against each other. But to the people who actually understood the history, to the ones who had been paying attention not just to the music but to the silence between the music, this was not surprising. This was inevitable. Because you cannot have a truth this heavy sitting in the middle of a community for 10 years without it eventually demanding to be acknowledged. You cannot have a man like Chief Keef, a man who genuinely loved his cousin, who genuinely carried that loss every single day, stay quiet forever. Silence has a shelf life. And for Keef, that shelf life had expired. Now let's talk about the internal dynamics of O'Block during this period. Because the decision to ban Keef was not unanimous. Not even close. Emotions ran high in ways that people on the outside could not fully see. There were members of the community, people who had been down since the beginning, people who knew Von personally and loved him deeply, who understood exactly what Keef was saying and why he was saying it, who privately acknowledged that the truth about blood money had been an open wound for too long, who felt that continuing to suppress it was doing more damage than letting it breathe. And then there were others who saw Keef's statements as an attack. A direct, deliberate assault on Von's legacy at a time when Von could no longer defend himself. People who argued that whatever happened in 2014 died with Von in 2020, and that dragging it back into the light served no purpose except to reopen pain that had barely begun to heal. These people were loud. They were emotional. And they had the ear of certain influential figures in the community who ultimately pushed the ban forward. Sources close to the situation described the meetings. And yes, there were actual meetings, actual conversations that happened in person between people who matter in that community, as some of the most intense they had ever witnessed. People who had never raised their voices at each other were raising their voices. People who had stood side by side through genuine tragedy were suddenly standing on opposite sides of a line that nobody wanted to draw but nobody could pretend wasn't there. One source told our team, and these are almost direct words, it felt like we were choosing between the truth and the family. And nobody should ever have to make that choice. That statement right there tells you everything you need to know about the impossible position O'Block found itself in the moment Keef's words started circulating. But here is the twist that nobody in the mainstream conversation is talking about. Here is the detail that changes the entire frame of this story. The push to ban Chief Keef from O'Block did not originate from Von's closest friends. It did not come from the people who grew up with him, who were with him every day, who understood the full complexity of who he was beyond the music and the mythology. It came from a much smaller group. A group with very specific motivations for wanting this narrative buried. A group that understood, perhaps better than anyone, that if Keef's confirmation got traction, if it moved from whispers to mainstream coverage, certain other truths would inevitably follow it into the light. Because Blood Money's death was not an isolated incident. It existed within a much larger web of Chicago street history that touched multiple people, multiple families, multiple situations that have never been fully resolved. And the people pushing hardest for the ban were not doing it out of love for Vaughn. They were doing it out of fear of what comes next if the first domino falls. And Chief Keef, who is many things but has never been naive about how Chicago operates, understood this completely. According to sources, when word of the potential ban reached him, his response was not anger. It was not defensiveness. It was something far more unsettling. Sources say Keef received the news of the ban discussion with a stillness that people around him found almost unnerving. Like a man who had already anticipated this exact reaction and had already decided how he was going to respond to it. Like someone who had been playing a longer game than anyone realized and was simply watching the board move in the direction he expected. And then he made a move that nobody in O'Block saw coming. Not publicly. Not through a post or a statement or a diss track. Privately. Directly. To someone inside Vaughn's circle who he knew would carry the message to the right people. And the message he sent was simple but devastating in its implications. He said, "Ban me if you want. But before you do, ask yourselves one question. Ask yourselves who in your own circle knew about blood money before it happened. Ask yourselves who had information that could have changed the outcome of that night in 2014 and chose to stay silent. Ask yourselves whether the person you're protecting right now is Vaughn's memory, or someone who is still very much alive and very much present in your community today." When that message landed, when the person Keef sent it through delivered it to the people it was meant for, the room went silent in a way that told everyone present exactly what they needed to know. Because nobody argued with it. Nobody said Keef was wrong. They just sat with it. And in that silence, in that heavy, suffocating, truth-soaked silence, the real story of what happened to Blood Money, and who knew what about it, began to surface in ways that could no longer be controlled. And that is when Quando Rondo's name entered the conversation in a way that nobody expected. And that is when Quando Rondo's name entered the conversation in a way that nobody expected. Now before you close this tab or skip ahead thinking you know where this is going, I need you to understand that what I am about to tell you is not the connection you think it is. This is not about the night King Vaughn died. This is not about Atlanta or Monaco Hookah Lounge or any of the events of November 2020 that the whole world already knows about. This is about something that happened before all of that. Something that connects Quando Rondo to the Blood Money situation in a way that fundamentally reframes the entire timeline of this beef and forces you to ask questions about what this conflict was really built on. See, everyone has always assumed that the beef between Vaughn's camp and Quando was born from specific incidents that happened in the years leading up to 2020. Disrespectful posts, proximity issues, the natural friction of two rising artists from neighboring but opposing worlds bumping into each other in an industry that isn't big enough for everyone's ego. And that assumption is partially correct. Those things did happen. That friction was real. But according to sources who have been inside both worlds at various points, there was a much older, much deeper layer to the animosity. A layer that traces back not to 2019 or 2018, but to the aftermath of 2014. To the period following Blood Money's death when Chicago street politics were being reorganized in the wake of what happened. And in that reorganization, in those conversations about who owed what to whom and who stood where, Quando Rondo's name came up in connection with information. Not as a shooter. Not as a direct participant in what happened to Mario Hess. But as someone who allegedly had knowledge of movements, of plans, of information that circulated in certain networks that crossed geographic lines between Chicago and the South in ways that people don't always map publicly. Now, this is the most sensitive part of everything we are presenting tonight. And I want to be very clear about what we are saying and what we are not saying. We are not saying Quando Rondo had anything to do with Blood Money's death. We are saying that sources claim his name appeared in conversations in the aftermath of that death in ways that certain people in Chicago filed away and never forgot. And when Vaughn and Quando eventually came into direct conflict years later, that filing cabinet got opened. And the contents of it informed the intensity of what followed in ways that the public narrative has never fully captured. Chief Keef, who has connections that stretch far beyond what most people realize, was aware of this. And according to sources, part of what emboldened him to finally speak on blood money was the understanding that the full picture of that situation implicates more than just one person. That Vaughn may have been the trigger, but the network around that trigger, the information that made certain things possible, extended into places and people that the official story has always conveniently left out. When this layer of the story began circulating inside O'Block alongside Keef's original confirmation, the community fractured in a way that the banned discussion could not contain. Because now it wasn't just about protecting Vaughn's legacy from an outside accusation. Now it was about confronting the possibility that the world Vaughn lived and died in was far more compromised, far more entangled, far more morally complex than the tribute posts and the legacy rollouts had ever acknowledged. Fans began to feel the shift even before any of this was explicitly public. The energy online changed. People who had been unified in their grief and their celebration of Vaughn's music suddenly found themselves in comment sections where the questions being asked were uncomfortable and the answers being offered were even more uncomfortable. And Vaughn's family, the people who loved him not as an icon but as a son, a brother, a cousin, a friend, found themselves in the most painful position of all. Because they were hearing these things too. They were getting the calls and the messages and the whispered conversations. And they were being forced to hold two completely contradictory truths at the same time. The truth of who Vaughn was to them, the love, the loyalty, the irreplaceable human being, and the truth of what Vaughn may have been to other people. To Mario Hess's family. To a mother who lost her son outside her own home in West Englewood and never got a public answer about who was responsible. The family was left divided in ways that grief alone cannot explain. Sources close to Vaughn's relatives described conversations happening behind closed doors that were unlike anything they had experienced in the 4 years since his passing. Accusations flying not outward but inward. Questions being asked of each other that nobody wanted to be the first to answer. And underneath all of it, a growing awareness that the ban on Chief Keef, far from making this situation quieter, had actually turned up the volume on every single unresolved question that O'Block had been hoping to keep private. Because banning Keef didn't silence him. It confirmed him. When you ban someone for telling a truth, you don't erase the truth. You amplify it. You put a spotlight on it. You tell the entire watching world that what this person said was dangerous enough to warrant that kind of response. And the entire watching world, millions of fans, bloggers, podcasters, street historians, Chicago natives who lived through this era and knew every name and every neighborhood, took that confirmation and ran with it. The internet became a courtroom. Every piece of footage ever recorded featuring Vaughn, Keef, Blood Money, O'Block, GB, all of it got re-examined. Timelines got reconstructed. Old interviews got clipped and reposted with new context. People who had been silent for years started talking, not in mainstream media, but in the spaces where the real Chicago conversations have always happened. And what emerged from all of that collective excavation was a picture so layered, so interconnected, so full of relationships and betrayals and decade-old debts that trying to assign simple blame to any one person suddenly felt not just inadequate but almost dishonest. This was never a simple story. It was never just about one night or one decision or one person's choices. It was about a world where the line between survival and destruction is so thin that crossing it sometimes happens before you even realize you've moved. It was about young men making permanent decisions in temporary situations, and the communities around them choosing silence as a form of love when sometimes silence is just another word for complicity. Chief Keef knew that when he spoke. He knew that opening this door meant every room behind it would eventually have to be entered. He did it anyway. Because Mario Hess deserved that. Because Big Glow deserved to have someone love him loudly enough to accept the consequences of telling the truth about what happened to him. And now, with the ban confirmed, with the community divided, with Quando's name circulating in contexts that nobody fully expected, with Vaughn's family navigating grief and revelation simultaneously, the only question that matters is what happens next. Whether the truth that has been clawing its way to the surface for 10 years finally gets to breathe. Whether the people who have been protecting certain silences decide that the cost of maintaining them has finally become too high. Whether Chicago, a city that has lost so much, that has given so much to this culture, that has had its pain turned into entertainment for a global audience without always receiving the dignity that pain deserves, finally gets the full, unfiltered, uncomfortable truth about one of the most consequential chapters in its recent history. We don't know the answer to that yet, but we are watching, and we will be here when it comes. Alright, if you are still here with me right now, I need you to do 3 things immediately. First, hit that like button right now. Not tomorrow, not after the next video, right now. Because Vaughn's story, Blood Money's story, the full truth of what Chicago has been carrying for a decade, that deserves to be heard by as many people as possible. Every like pushes this video to someone who needs to see it. Every share keeps this conversation alive when powerful people would prefer it stayed dead and buried. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on every notification. Because this story is not over. Not even close. We have more sources coming forward. We have more information that we are currently verifying. We have pieces of this puzzle that we are not ready to put on the table yet because we want to make sure that when we do, every single detail is airtight. When the next chapter of this drops, and it will drop, you need to be in this room when it happens. Hit that bell. Make sure you are here. Third, and this is the one that matters most to me personally, go to the comments right now and tell me what you think. Do you believe Chief Keef confirmed what the streets have been saying since 2014? Do you think O-Block made the right move by pushing this ban, or did they accidentally confirm everything Keef said by reacting the way they did? And what about Quando? Does his name appearing in this context change how you see the larger story of this beef? Drop your thoughts below. Be honest. Be real. This is the space for that conversation. Because at the end of the day, this is bigger than rap beef. This is about truth. About accountability. About what we owe to the people we lose and the stories we tell about them after they're gone. King Von deserves his full truth. Blood Money deserves his full truth. And the people still living in the wake of all of this deserve a world where the silence finally breaks. Stay locked in. We are just getting started.